No way would I live with Emily.
What?
At my son Greg's wedding, his bride Jessica burst out laughing and pointed at me. Greg had suggested that we live together since I was starting to need a little help with care. Jessica had even smiled and agreed when she visited my home.
There's no way I'm doing any caregiving, and I'm not living in that big, rundown house. A mom who burdens her son like that should just cut ties and leave.
I didn't want to be a burden to Greg or Jessica. I should have hidden how bad my health was from my son. As I regretted that, Greg suddenly stood up.
Mom, I'm sorry.
Huh?
The new house you bought us as a wedding gift. You know, the $2 million apartment, we actually don't need it anymore.
The moment Jessica heard that, she shrieked.
What? A $2 million home? What is that supposed to mean, Emily?
My name is Emily. 5 years ago, I lost my husband, David, to illness, and now I live alone in a small town. I was devastated after losing David, who had been my partner for so many years. I wonder if he's worried about me. Maybe that's why Greg, my only son, calls me once a week to check on me. Greg works for a big company in New York. I once had the chance to talk to his boss, who said, "Greg is really exceptional," and I couldn't have been prouder. But being that exceptional must mean his workload is no joke, I imagined. So I tried to reassure him by saying, "I'm okay, don't worry about me." But Greg would always respond.
I'm just worried about you.
It made me so happy that he turned out to be such a caring and thoughtful son. Then, one day, the phone rang.
Hello? Mom,
"Hi, Greg."
how are you feeling? It's been getting chilly lately.
"Don't worry about me. I'm doing just fine." Hearing his familiar voice made me smile again today. At first, I felt hesitant, but now I found myself looking forward to Greg's calls more and more. However, something was a little different this time. Greg's voice sounded slightly tense.
Actually, I'm getting married.
"Really?" I couldn't help but gasp at Greg's words. My sweet, serious, and thoughtful son was finally getting married. I was so overjoyed that I started asking questions one after another. Who's the lucky girl? I'm sure she's amazing if Greg chose her. How did you two meet? Oh, I can't wait to meet her. Greg let out a bit of a sigh, sounding slightly troubled by my excitement. Then he began to tell me the story of how they met. Greg's fiancée was a woman named Jessica. About 5 months ago, Greg had attended a mixer with some women from another company that was in the same building. That's where he met Jessica. Jessica seemed to be a strong-willed woman who had pursued Greg with enthusiasm, and after 3 months of dating, they became a couple.
But
What's wrong? Greg paused for a moment before continuing.
she's kind of a bit pushy, you know? I mean, after only 3 months of dating, Jessica proposed to me. I told her it was too soon, but she insisted.
He trailed off. I felt a little uneasy hearing that, but soon after, I heard him laugh from the other end of the line.
It's fine. I love her too.
Although I still felt a bit concerned, I brushed it off.
I'm coming home next long weekend with Jessica.
Got it. Looking forward to it. Talk to you later. After hanging up, I let out a sigh. I was happy that Greg would be bringing Jessica to visit. But I was also worried about how I would explain my situation. Due to my age, I now needed some mild caregiving. For now, I had a helper come by occasionally, but I wasn't sure how Jessica would feel about that. It was a bit of a concern. What will be, will be. I told myself, writing the date of their visit on the calendar. Then, the long weekend arrived. I had prepared lunch for Greg and Jessica. I just wanted to see them smile. That was all I cared about. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I rushed to the door, and Greg, whom I hadn't seen in a while, and a woman with a sweet perfume were there.
Hey, Mom, long time no see. Oh, this is Jessica, my fiancée.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Jessica was a beautiful woman, but her expression was sharp, and she seemed somewhat disappointed. Her look, as if to say this wasn't what she expected, made me tense up a little. Well, let's not chat in the doorway. I'll show you to the living room. I somehow managed to say that and led Greg and Jessica inside. This house was one that David had built so the three of us could live happily together. That's why there were so many rooms. And the house was big. Even getting to the living room required quite a walk down the hallway. Sorry about this. We're almost there, I said, smiling at Jessica, but she frowned and replied with a curt,
Uh-huh.
I sensed something was off, but decided to wait until we got to the living room to listen to what they had to say. I asked them to sit down on the couch in the living room and began to prepare tea.
I'll do it.
No, it's fine. You just sit with Jessica. Greg nodded and sat next to Jessica. Once the tea was ready, I placed it in front of them and then sat down myself.
So, Mom,
What?
you seem to be moving a bit stiffly. Is something wrong?
Greg's question made me realize that the moment I'd been dreading had finally come. I didn't really want to talk about this with the newlyweds, but I knew I had to. There was no way forward without being honest. So I began to explain. Well, the truth is, my health hasn't been great lately. I spoke with my doctor and it turns out I need a bit of caregiving, though it's mild.
Really?
What?
Their shock was understandable. I took a sip of tea to calm myself. Recently, a helper has been coming to assist me. Greg's voice trembled as he asked.
Why didn't you tell me sooner?
Hearing his reaction, I started to regret keeping it to myself. I didn't want you to worry. You have your own life to live.
Maybe, but if you're struggling.
Greg trailed off and looked at Jessica.
Jessica, I want to take care of my mom. I'm going to request a transfer at work.
What?
Can we live with my mom, please?
Greg began to plead with Jessica, almost lowering his head in desperation. I stood up without thinking. Greg, you don't need to live with me. You and Jessica should enjoy your life together. It wouldn't be fair for me to intrude on their newlywed life. I tried my best to stop Greg. Jessica must feel awkward about this too, right?
Mom, you raised me, and I owe you so much. You're a very important part of my life.
Greg. Jessica, who had been stunned, suddenly smiled.
It's okay. Greg's right. It's probably tough to live alone, so I agree with living together.
Jessica, thank you so much.
Greg was crying tears of gratitude, and Jessica gazed at him warmly. I couldn't help but tear up too. The strange feeling I had earlier must have just been my imagination. I was moved by how lucky we were to have Jessica in our family. From then on, the atmosphere lightened, and we enjoyed the rest of the visit. Jessica even brought a lovely gift, and we spent the afternoon together in harmony.
As for the wedding date, we're planning it for the month after next.
That sounds good. Where's the ceremony going to be?
We've booked the Hilton Hotel. Jessica really wanted it there.
It's been my dream to have a wedding at that hotel.
Greg looked at her with such tenderness, and all the doubts I had earlier disappeared. These two will be fine. And since they'll be living with me, I'll need to do what I can to help. But I kept a certain secret from Jessica as I watched them happily discuss their wedding plans.
Jessica, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Time flew by, and before I knew it, it was their wedding day. Jessica, in her pure white dress, looked absolutely stunning, and Greg's face was beaming with happiness as he walked beside her. After the ceremony at the chapel, we moved to the reception hall for the celebration. The reception was going smoothly, or so I thought. But after the cake cutting, Jessica grabbed the microphone and looked directly at me, seated at the groom's family table. Then,
I'm not living with Emily.
What?
Jessica practically shouted the words, glaring at me with full force. It wasn't just me who was shocked. Greg stared at her in disbelief as well. Jessica seemed oblivious to the tension she'd caused, continuing on, despite the awkward silence around her.
There's no way I'm doing any caregiving and living in that rundown house. No, thank you. If Greg's mom is going to be a burden.
After she finished, Jessica let out a high-pitched laugh, like something straight out of a nightmare. I furrowed my brow. I couldn't stay silent after such an outburst, especially on a day that was supposed to be a joyful occasion for my son. And I certainly couldn't forgive her for ruining his big day. With anger quietly bubbling up inside, I sighed. Oh, is that so? Jessica huffed, as if daring me to challenge her. She looked as if she were saying, "Did I say something wrong?" Greg, sitting next to her, was looking at her with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. He sighed, much like I had.
So that's how you really think?
And what if it is? I don't want to take care of some old woman living off her pension. And don't tell me Greg doesn't secretly feel the same. Who would willingly do that, right? I married you because I thought you were a rich and successful man. And now this. I'm the one who's shocked.
Jessica was practically spitting with rage as she ranted, while Greg frowned and glanced at me. Then he turned back to Jessica.
There's something I didn't tell you yet, Jessica. We were planning to move into a luxury high-rise at the same time as the move-in with my mom. I wanted it to be a surprise, so I kept it quiet.
What?
Jessica was stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked between me and Greg, speechless.
Mom, what do you say? Shall we live in the $2 million apartment with just Mom and me?
Yes, let's do that. If she's that against it, we might as well. Yes. The secret I had been keeping was the $2 million luxury apartment. Greg and I had planned to surprise Jessica with it, but we never imagined things would turn out like this. Jessica was still holding the microphone, muttering softly.
No, this can't be.
I added, with a hint of regret in my voice. Jessica, my late husband left me a significant inheritance. We were planning to move next week. But as I said, if you're that opposed, there's nothing we can do. Jessica began to tremble. She turned to Greg, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him.
No, this is a lie. I thought you were living in that old house because you had no money. I've been tricked. Why didn't you tell me something this important?
Jessica's shrill cries echoed through the room, no longer the beautiful bride she had been earlier.
That was all a lie. I really do want to live with Emily.
She said desperately, still clutching the microphone, but everyone saw through her deception. Greg took the microphone from her hands and bowed deeply to the guests.
Thank you all for coming today to celebrate with us. I'm deeply sorry for wasting your precious time with such a spectacle. We will be refunding all the gifts, and the wedding is hereby canceled. I truly apologize.
The guests nodded in understanding, one by one leaving their seats. Meanwhile, Jessica, having realized the gravity of the situation, was pale as a sheet, trembling and shouting.
Wait, this can't be real. It's a lie.
Not long after that disastrous wedding, it was discovered that Jessica had been unfaithful. The man Jessica had been involved with was a failing host named Mark, and it turned out that most of the money Greg had been giving Jessica for living expenses had been given to him. Furious after Jessica's outburst at the wedding, Greg was enraged even further when he found out this fact, and he lashed out at her with the fury of a wildfire. To make matters worse, Mark had already quit his hosting jobs and even completed the moving process to follow Jessica. Of course, Greg sued Mark for damages and also demanded a lump sum of alimony from Jessica. On top of that, Jessica was billed for the wedding costs and all the money she gave Mark, leaving her looking beyond pale. At first, both Jessica and Mark tried to negotiate for reduced payments, but after some stern warnings from Greg's lawyer, they gave up. Jessica ended up borrowing the remaining amount from shady loan sharks to pay back Greg. Though they had registered their marriage before the wedding, Greg and Jessica quickly divorced, and now Jessica works tirelessly day and night to repay her massive debts. As for Mark, after being abandoned by Jessica, he went off in search of another woman. However, with his own pile of debt, he hasn't had much luck and now lives a lonely, quiet life. Greg, on the other hand, is thriving. Having returned to his hometown, he's been tackling his work with new enthusiasm. Meanwhile, I continue to live a fulfilling life, occasionally receiving visits from my caregiver. Every day, I happily send Greg off to work from the luxurious apartment I bought with the inheritance David left me. I'm truly happy now.